And take it away, Rami.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody being here and for all that you do. I must say, I read through that email I got the other day. I'm on the list of the Palestine stuff, I didn't even know which exact list it is, but it had a complete record of all of the agendas and things that you've been working on at MAPA for the last 6, 9 months or something. And it was just spellbinding to see the range of things that you grapple with organizationally, strategically, et cetera, logistically. And it just raised my level of respect for you even higher than it was already very high. Uh, so, in the 15 minutes I have, I'll give you some quick headlines about what I think are the key things that are happening now politically that really you should be aware of. I think overall, we are at a historic junction in the two related confrontations or contests that have gone on for the past uh, almost the past century since Balfour Declaration in 1917. One is the contest between Zionism and Arabism in Palestine, now the state of Israel and the Palestinian people and the others, the Arabs and others who support Palestine. And the other one is the battle between the Western colonial powers and the indigenous people in the Arab world and the global South. Those two have merged now into a really dramatic dynamic confrontation at many levels. And this is something I'm working on to write some articles about. But you can't separate now the traditional history of Western colonialism and its subjugation of the global South, including much of the Middle East. You can't separate that from the local contest between Arabism and Zionism. Uh, and so we have two parallel forces at work. We're seeing, first of all, the support for Palestinian rights globally exploding in so many different ways. Support for Palestinian rights also means support for equal rights for the Israelis. Some people question that, but in my view, we can only really work for a resolution of this conflict that is anchored in law and global consensus and treats the Israelis and the Palestinians with equal and simultaneous rights to statehood, to sovereignty, to security, and to dignity. The Israelis already have their state. The Palestinians are still struggling for theirs. But the incredible support that's coming globally for the Palestinians, it's hard to keep up with it. Things move so quickly now, and we see it in many different ways. The countries that have formally recognized Palestine at the UN, countries that are taking more into Gaza children for medical treatment around the world. The General Assembly vote 2 weeks ago, and the latest one, the meeting Monday that France and Saudi Arabia hosted to work for a Palestinian state. Um, Strikes and bans against contacts with Israeli ships or weapons manufacturers or tourists all over the world spontaneously are happening. Um, and the number of people now who are raising the issue around the world of whether Israel should be banned from music festivals, sporting events, and other things like apartheid South Africa was. The convergence between Israel's current condition and the apartheid South African regime is pretty dramatic. And what is most dramatic about this phenomenon, this massive global and expanding and accelerating support, is that it's happening both at the official level of governments and at the popular level, civic society and protests and things like that. The government level remains mostly symbolic, like recognizing Palestine or slapping Israel on the wrist, without heavy duty action. But still, we're starting to see the official and the popular sentiments converging, which is really important. Um, and the flotilla is one of the most dramatic examples now of this kind of global support, where governments are now stepping in, Spain, Italy, others, to help protect the flotilla from Israeli attacks. We'll see how that goes. So that's at one side, the support for Palestine and a resolution of the conflict peacefully. On the other side, what you have is an intensifying, acute convergence between the American president and government official position supporting Israel in almost anything it wants to do, and the genocidal policies of the state of Israel. Those two things have gotten closer together, and that both the US and Israel are now jointly um, trying to knock out, knock out the foundations of established international norms and laws and traditions and the role of the UN and conflict resolution, things like that. And Trump's speech at the UN yesterday was a dramatic example of this. So we're openly seeing Israel and the US together doing things like restricting free speech, not obeying international law, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something that is important because it shows the isolation of Israel and the US globally, with just a handful of countries that support them, whereas the majority of people around the world are pushing actively for political progress in Palestine. And in parallel with this, we see a very docile Arab world. The Arab world, unfortunately, or the Arab governments, I should say, have really proven unable to do anything other than make statements. Maybe they're doing things behind the scenes quietly. We don't know. We'll find out. But I don't think so. And this is partly, more than partly, heavily due, I think, to the reality that the Arab governments have not been able to fulfill the role that governments should fulfill in any country in the world, which is to provide their people with security, developmental needs, basic human rights and human needs, whether it's schooling or free speech or whatever. They haven't been able to do what good governments should do, um, or security. And they have more or less relinquished, the Arab governments have more or less relinquished their sovereignty, so that they can't make a decision that hurts them, that might hurt them, a decision like criticizing the US or threatening a boycott or something, because the US can totally demolish them, given the dependence most Arab countries have, with a few exceptions only, on the United States and Western countries, whether it's military support, financial links. Some countries depend on the US for food, others for the goodwill of the US and Israel. So that combination of dynamics, global populist support, US Israel deepening their alliance that is trying to push forward this militant, almost fascist agenda, both in the Middle East and globally, and the total docility of the Arabs watching this on Jazeera. So this is the main issue that strikes me as politically important to watch, because these dynamics are clashing and they can't be sustained at this level like they are. Something has to give. Um, the U.S. role in the Middle East remains, to me, ambiguous. It's not clear and I say the U.S. role, I'm saying the policies of the U.S. government. The American people, we know from polling evidence, are very different than the government. There's much more support for Palestinian rights, equal Palestinian-Israeli rights, ending the war, ceasefire, etc. But the government still takes positions that um, are mostly pro-Israeli, but occasionally you get a glimmer of something. It's like Trump yesterday meeting with Arab leaders at the UN. allegedly proposing a new plan for how to resolve the war in Gaza and move on to reconstruction, etc., the next stage and a peaceful resolution of the conflict. We have no idea what's in that plan. There's been leaks, but it's not something that we can rely on very much. Um, but the important thing is that we've reached the point now where we can see that a if political leaders in Western countries get to a point where they feel threatened by the popular pressures against them, the public opinion in their countries that might vote them out of office, if that happens, then you might see some more policy changes taking place. The polling evidence from around the world is compelling, and I can't go through it all, but there are clear signs of a continuing increase in popular support globally for Palestinian rights and a declining support for the policies of the State of Israel. And the most interesting poll I think that came out was last week was by Shibli Telhami at the University of Maryland, which showed that even among evangelical American Christians, which has been a core supporter for the Trump policies on the State of Israel, even there, the strong support for Israel is starting to fragment. And it's based on age, which is fascinating. Also based on news sources, like those who support, who follow Fox for their news are much more pro-Israeli. Those who don't follow Fox are much more pro-Palestinian or balanced between the two. So it's really the question now, and this is where MAPA's work is so important, is how can popular sentiment be channeled to pressure officials to take honorable, decent positions, law-abiding positions? Uh, and in this case means ceasefire, negotiated resolution, release hostages, release prisoners, everything that we want to happen. I think that's an important point, and I would assume that in MAPA and many other groups you're involved with, this is being discussed all the time. It's very critical to understand how we get to the point where officials change their policies. The last point I'd make is that while this is going on, there are still important American legislative moves taking place that the US government is still pushing a series of dynamics that are very scary. One of them is the right to the State Department's right to revoke any passport from any American citizen, even naturally born ones, if they're taking positions that are anti-Semitic or that support terrorism. And of course, the State Department is the one who decides on those definitions. There's legislation constantly being passed through the Congress about not supporting financially any group in the country, whether it's a university or a company or an NGO or whatever, that is thought to be involved in anti-Semitism or criticism of the State of Israel. And then there are moves in the Congress to increase the stockpiles of American weapons that are at the sole disposal of Israel. Now, none of this is new. I mean, some of it is new, the revoking passports and that extremist kind of stuff. But the continuation of these policies is troubling because there's still a majority in the Congress that will support the president. And so this is where the by-elections that are going to happen become so important. So these are the key points that I would mention that we need to keep our eyes on. There's about another dozen other ones, but I thought it'd be useful just to zero in on this dynamic of confrontation, a clash really between justice and injustice. And it's a global clash, and it's happening at the level of governments and popular sentiment and activism at the same time. This is totally unprecedented. Never, ever has this happened in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And that's why I feel more confident than ever that justice will prevail. We just have to keep the struggle.
You have like another minute if you want to say anything, another minute and a half, Rami, if you want to say anything else.
Well, I would want to talk about the American League East baseball pennant race, but I think that's for another day. So
Okay,
I will stop there, and I'd love to hear your questions or comments.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Rami. Um, so let's open the floor for a few questions. Please use the hand function or just raise your hand. Uh, have questions. Who has a question for Rami? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, another question. I just want to recommend that people check out the article that I linked to in the chat. It's a report by Barak Ravid, who's an Israeli reporter who also works for the New York Times. He's pretty well connected. He reported about the meeting of Trump with sort of middle regional leaders and gives some detail about what he proposed and the conditions that they put out. It actually, if the report is accurate, it's actually something positive, pretty positive. But who knows? Uh,
Yeah, Barak Ravid is a former Israeli intelligence officer also, and that's why he's so well informed. He has these intelligence sources that help keep him pretty well. They channel this kind of stuff to him. I'm not saying it's not accurate, but you have to be careful about what he reports because almost all of it tends to be favorable to Israel in different ways, very subtly. The other point I'd mention about that is that it's really striking how the Arab and rest of the global South's resistance to some of these outrageous plans that Tony Blair and Jared Kushner and Trump and others have proposed in the last 6 months about Gaza being a new Riviera and the Palestinians should leave and then investors should come in. Most of that talk has quieted down. And one of the reasons is because I think the only area where the Arab countries, I would give them good marks, is that they've resisted all of these attempts, including attempts to bribe them with money, especially Jordan and Egypt. The US and others tried to tell them, look, we'll pay you a lot of money if you take the Palestinians from Gaza into your countries. And they wouldn't do it because they understand the Arab countries, give governments understand how deeply the people of their countries feel about this and how deeply people around the global South feel about it, because this is where the link between the local conflict and the colonial traditions comes in, because people see these kind of ideas, these outlandish ideas, as very colonial in nature, that the white people in the West decide what is good, and the local people from the South have no rights. They don't have a say. They don't exist. Trump yesterday in his comments at the UN never used the word Palestine. He talked about Gaza, he talked about Hamas, talked about terrorism. So we're still in a situation where most of the Western, the bad Western leaders, or the colonial ones, uh, still see the Palestinians as having less rights than the Israelis. But this is gonna probably become the focal point of any change that happens now, which is how do you just get a ceasefire and then start the reconstruction process? It's going to take a couple of decades. It's not something that's going to happen quickly, and I don't think they're going to reach agreement very easily. But the fact that it's being discussed is a good point, and the fact that they're doing it quietly is probably a good point for the beginning. But later on, whatever they're talking about has to come out. It has to pass the test of public acceptance in the Arab world and all around the world. Um, But this is a fascinating dynamic, and we got to keep our eye on it.
Thanks, Rami. Any other last brief questions? Go ahead, Noble.
Sorry you can't see me because my camera seems to be broken for some reason. But anyway, real briefly, Rami, to what extent is the inaction, we'll say, of the Arab leaders, and many of them, a legacy of their past as, colonial puppets to some degree? I mean, a lot of those countries were set up by the British, right, back in the colonial, during the British Empire, so-called.
Yeah, it is very much linked to that. The deeper problem is that none of the Arab countries, not a single one that I can think of, was fully established through the will of its own people. In other words, we don't have a single Arab country with a self-determinant citizenry that defined itself, defined its borders, defined the nature of its government. When the Arabs tried to do this, going back to 1920, when, after the Ottomans were defeated in World War I, when Prince Faisal and his guys were trying to set up a democratic populist parliament in Damascus to cover the area that is now the Levant, which is Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and parts of Iraq. When they were trying to set up a reasonably participatory and accountable government system anchored in the will of the people, the French came and bombed them. They physically attacked them and caused Faisal to flee. And this has been going on ever since. When the Palestinians tried to create the populist assemblies in the 30s and 40s, the British and the Zionist movements prevented it physically by attacking people, killing people, expelling people. The British would take some of the leaders of the and send them to Mauritius and other places. So this is a problem, the continued inability of Arab countries to take reasonable, decent policies because these decisions are made by small groups of elites who are highly, fully dependent on the West for their survival. And because of their bad policies, they're fully dependent on the West, and only in a few cases other people not from the West, but they're dependent on foreign support for just their fundamental existence, for food, water, medicine, schooling, etc., etc. So yes, there is a clear link between the inability of the Arab governments to act decisively and the legacy of where they came from. And when the Arab world tried to change the system between 2010 and 2020, this incredible decade of Arab uprisings, the so-called Arab Spring, again, the elites with Western support clamped down on it and didn't let it succeed. So this is a problem, and I've said this before, I know, but it's worth repeating. The reason there's so much global support for Palestine is because the people all around the global South understand very well the colonial nature of the contest that's going on now. And they see the Palestinians as the last people in the world struggling for their rights and to decolonize themselves. And therefore, people understand the pain of being colonized, and they support the last anti-colonial struggle that's going on. So it's very exciting in many ways, very moving to see this happening. And the problem is the Israelis and the American government are so brutal in their military response to this, with other governments, the British, the Germans, others who have supported this. But those governments are starting to change a little bit, slowly, slowly. So we just have to keep watching this process and keep playing any role we can.